Hello, and welcome to our discipleship series of videos. Today I want to discuss more about how to interpret what we are reading in the Bible. When it comes to application or applying what we are reading and interpreting it appropriately, I think there's three questions that we ultimately have to ask. First, what was the author's intention when he wrote what he wrote? Secondly, what did the original audience hear and how did they apply it to their lives? And lastly, what can we take from it to deal with our daily lives that looks much different than the world that the Bible was written in? And I think if we do these three footwork, if we do these three tasks, we will be able to have an application and a life that is reflecting what the Bible teaches. I wanted in this video just simply to look at that first question. How do we figure out the author's intentions? What did he mean when he wrote what he wrote? Now, there's some people out there that might question whether this is even a valid statement. How can we ever know what the author originally meant? And it's a great argument. While we may not ever know precisely what the author meant, I think we can make an educated guesswork through two simple steps. The first step is understanding the historical background to the author's life. We have to be willing to understand what was going on in the lives of these men. They were real, living, breathing human beings, and they had lives that were affected by various things that was happening around them. And if we understand everything that was happening, not even everything, if we just understand a little bit of what was happening on in their lives, we can gain a greater understanding of what they meant when they wrote what they did. For instance, if we understand that Paul was in jail when he wrote Philippians, then we can gain a better understanding of this bold statement he makes where we are to rejoice in every circumstances. Because sometimes when we read that, we're like, Paul, you don't understand what my life is like. But he did. He was in jail, and it wasn't a pretty jail. It wasn't 3 meals and TV. It was a pretty rough situation. And yet Paul still found joy in that circumstance. Or maybe if we understand the first century Roman slavery, we can understand this little letter that Paul writes called Philemon. And we can understand why he talks about reconciliation and usefulness. When he talks about this slave that ran away and he's coming home as a Christian to a Christian master. And it has so much more meaning when we understand what was happening in the first century world. So we ought to understand the background. To get a good understanding, a good grasp of the background, you don't have to be a Bible scholar. You don't have to go to Bible college or to seminary. You can get this information pretty much anywhere. Most study Bibles, before the beginning of any book, will have a simple write-up of the historical setting. You can find a good commentary, and it usually has a section near the beginning that discusses this stuff as well. And so if you can read some of that and have that in the back of your mind as you're reading the letters and reading the books of the Bible, it will be extremely helpful for you. The second step beyond the historical background is understanding genre. Genre is a big fancy word that simply means what type of literature are we talking about. And depending on what type of literature it is, it determines how we interpret things. One preacher put it this way: if I began to talk to you and I say once upon a time, you would know that I'm telling a fairy tale. And that whatever I'm about to say didn't actually happen, more than likely, but maybe there is a principle we can learn from it, a principle that we can learn and apply to our lives. If I were to begin a story with the party of the first concedes to the party of the second, you would think legal document, you would interpret it appropriately. And that's what happens with the Bible, is the Bible isn't just one big book. It is 66 different books filled with all kinds of literary genre. There's poetry, there's prophecy, there's history, there's legal documents, there's gospel, there's parables, there's apocalypse. And there's all kinds of different genres, and before we jump in and try to interpret what the author meant, we have to kind of look at that and ask, what type of genre is he writing? And the reason why this is important is because some genres are meant to be interpreted literally, and some genres are meant to be interpreted figuratively. And depending on what's being written determines which one we should be using. See, there's problems when you interpret the Bible entirely literally. It's hard to explain some things. God isn't literally a mighty fortress. He isn't literally a storm shelter. We're not literally going to be like trees planted in the waters. All right, that's not supposed to be literal. They're supposed to be figurative because it's poetic. And even within certain books, such as the Gospels, there's all kinds of different genres all thrown in together to this one big genre that we call gospel. And so even within a book, we have to ask, what is being written? Should it be interpreted figuratively? Should it be interpreted literally? And those are big questions. But I think if we can figure that out, if we can get that into our mind, this is how we're supposed to be interpreting this, we can understand the historical background, then we can begin to ask that question, what did the author mean? What was he trying to communicate to us about God? What was he wanting us to do in response to what he is writing? That's the first step in applying the Bible to our lives. And it's a big step, but it is a step that all of us can do.